hello everyone. Welcome back to Contemplating Resonance, where we explore deep conversations around spirituality, healing, and personal transformation. What are you doing?
I'm making faces as what you're talking about.
I'm loving it.
We have deep conversations, and I'm like, this is my deep conversation face.
Can you tell that we've done this before? I am your host, Matt Stine, and today we are continuing our stories of healing from a religious trauma series. And as you can tell, we have an amazing guest returning to the show, Hana the Suburban Witch, who also goes by other names on TikTok, which I will not repeat.
Oh, no.
But you'll remember her maybe, but if you're new to the show, she'll get to introduce herself here in just a second. She's not only a witch and a spiritual healer, but also someone who's done extensive work in helping others break free from religious indoctrination. And we're going to talk about that as well, because this episode is going to be all about diving deep into cult tactics. We're going to talk about the bite model of authoritarian control. We're going to talk about phobia indoctrination, two ways that followers can be manipulated and controlled. And we're also going to talk about a more nuanced area of that. I know a lot of our listeners will be familiar with the Christian doctrine of the rapture, and Hana happens to have a class for that, which I went through, and I think that if this is something that you're dealing with, highly recommend that you get your hands on this teaching because it's really, really good. I used to teach Sunday school, and I learned a bunch. So, Hana, welcome back. And for those who are new to the show, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hello, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. It is wonderful to be back. I am a professional witch, and sometimes to those, especially with religious trauma, that can sound so scary, and I get that, but I promise you I'm really nice. I'm not scary at all. I'm bright and colorful, as I say in my black shirt, but I have pink hair and pink glasses, so I look fun. I am also a professional astrologer, professional tarot reader, and I really specialize in helping folks deconstruct from religion, specifically evangelical or Pentecostal Christianity. But a lot of these tactics we're going to be talking about, they are not just relegated to Christianity. They are cult tactics, and they can be seen across, all religions in some manner, shape, or form. But also we see them in business. We see them in a lot of pyramid schemes or pyramid style businesses, MLMs. Insert your favorite essential oil brand here, leggings brand, whatever it is, which unfortunately a lot of churchgoers get roped into those as well because it...
I was wondering if you're going to get there.
Yeah, it mimics...
I remember that last 10 years or so in the church of like literally every month there was a new one that a mom in the class had is going to have a party, and these parties were going on like every week. It was crazy.
Yeah, and unfortunately it preys on the people who are in that because A, they're already set up for that sort of conditioned thinking, right? They're already susceptible to that. They're already living in that. B, a lot of these pyramid schemes and MLM brands, they capitalize on the fact that, you can do this easily whilst you're at home, which is where women are supposed to be, in the home, raising your children, not out there working. But if you want to have some semblance of, income or feel proud about yourself, how about you do this on the side? And it's a full-blown job that they convince you to do for very, very little money, if anything, right? So it's a whole thing, but we do see a big crossover between MLM schemes and Christianity, unfortunately.
I mean, churches certainly convince us to do a lot of labor for free, too.
Yes, absolutely.
In fact, I remember that being, I want to say that was one of the big things that I saw when I was watching that Hillsong documentary was the number of people who were talking about how basically they had been working a full-time job for no pay for years at the church.
Hillsong is really bad for that. Many mega churches are. I was reading, so I have this tiny little VeggieTales autograph book that is in my little box of memories, and my daughter found that recently, and it is a wild ride flicking through that, but I digress. One of the entries was from when I was 12, and it says, hey, future Hana, this is me, you, in the past. Writing a little note to myself, okay?
Yeah.
And, how are you doing? I'm not doing too well. And I'm like, oh, poor little 12-year-old me. But then it says, but I am a deacon at church now, and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And, glory be to God. Love Hannah and love you, God. Like, it's very, very sweet. A little bit sad. But also I'm like, at 12, I was a deacon. So at 12, I essentially had a volunteer position at the church. And I'm pretty sure I had one way before that as well, in Sunday school or in this or that. There was always like positions that you could step into, right? And the deacons at our church were the welcomers. So you'd welcome someone into the church. You would guide them to a seat. You would give them the little printout that they had for every week. Sometimes you would give out the money bags for tithes and offerings and hand them around, or sometimes you would help with the communion. You'd usually pack things up afterwards. Like there was a lot there. So you'd have to be at church early and stay late every week at 12. And I would say that most organizations have some aspect of this, but I tell you what, they were roping everyone into something.
Yeah. I did my penance in the childcare area of church. Well, they make no like attempt to hide the fact that they're like, oh, we're caring for your kids every week. You better show up once a month to do your part. And we're sitting there thinking, this is the one time we've had them out of our hair.
Yeah.
In 7 days. Give us our break. I remember, I mean, honestly, like even when I didn't like going to church anymore, that was when they were tiny, like it's like, oh my gosh, I'll go to church just to get, I can go to the bathroom alone.
You know what? This is a really good segue because community support is a huge part of cult tactics because it's a positive. And when we talk about cults, everyone always thinks about the negatives or the negative things like phobia, indoctrination, scaring someone into believing the thing and behaving the way you want them to. But we often miss the beneficial side of things. The positive praise you get for doing the right thing. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. This community support, when people go through a hard time, people in the church, they'll rally. They'll, bake food for you. They'll do this, they'll do that. As long as you're, within their perception of a good Christian, they will support you. And that is really hard to get out of because when you leave the church, that all disappears. And so the negative association with that is the leaving, the letting go of it, because it feels so good when you're in it. So that's a big part of how cults will get you in. They make you feel welcome. They make you feel loved. They make you feel accepted, right? That's a huge draw. They make you feel supported. So there was a study. I can't tell you which one it was because I don't remember. There was a study done, though, on the types of people that get drawn into cults. And it is nothing to do with IQ. It is nothing to do with how clever people are or smart they are. There are plenty of very, very, very clever people who are Christian. Nothing to do with IQ. Everything to do with your emotional layout, right? How much trauma you carry, how sensitive you are, empathetic. Sympathetic to others, all of these things, those are the strings they pull.
Yeah. And like just having that very strong desire to connect with spirit, even like being a spiritual person, if that's the only avenue that you have available to you to make that connection, you're more likely to take that over nothing.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of like, while I'm kind of wandering around in the wilderness after leaving the church, trying to figure out what I'm going to do with myself. Am I going to be an atheist? Am I going to be a this? Am I going to be... Why am I concerned about what I'm going to be? Like, why am I trying? Because like you walk away, you don't just leave that community support behind. You leave behind your identity. You leave behind your purpose in life. You leave behind why you're here at all. And it's like, okay, well, I don't have that. And they didn't let me learn about any of the other sources from which you can get that stuff. So it's like being a newborn with no mother there to care for you. And you're like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, suddenly all
And
your
it freaked me out.
Yeah, the answers are all ripped away from me.
It's like, I don't like the answers that I had, but they were answers.
Yeah, I need something, right? I completely rejected the atheist stage. I never went through the atheist stage. I went through the angry at the church stage. I went through the agnostic stage for a very long time, but I very much stuck by there's something. I know there's something. I don't know what it is. It probably wasn't that, but there's something. I can't believe that there's nothing. That was always that belief.
I tried on atheism briefly, and I went and read, the big atheists, and I decided that they were mostly full of shit. Like, I decided that, no, you guys are just angry old men. You're not atheists. You don't really believe this.
Look, my husband was atheist for a long time, and if you ask him, he probably still says he is, but I know he's had some experiences now that he's like, well, I actually can't explain that. I don't know what brought that on, where that came from. And it's cracked that atheist title a little bit. He'd probably still hold on to it, but it's definitely cracking because
I don't see
sometimes
how I can be in the same house with you and not rub off a little bit.
Absolutely. So there's definitely almost an absence of experience that I think lends itself to atheism. And when I came out of the church, I was not someone who hadn't experienced things. I had experienced things that I couldn't now understand why or how. So then I went searching for the answers because I was like, there was stuff though. I felt it. I saw it. It happened. But why? Which led me here to the path of witch.
Yeah. It's really amazing how, if you look at all these things through a certain set of glasses, that it's not that they're not spiritual. It's not that they're not doing like legitimate spiritual workings and raising energy and doing. It's not that that's not going on. It's very much going on. It's just not the kind of juju I want. It's geared towards ends that I'm not okay with. And so, I very much believe that, anywhere there's a bunch of that stuff going on, stuff's going to happen, right? You're going to experience things. And so it's like, it's not that they're wrong, it's that they're wrong, right?
I've always said that, especially the evangelical church is the most psychically active church. They just don't call it that. They have different words for that. Where one person might call it energy healing, someone else might call it laying of hands. Where someone might call it law of attraction, they might call it speaking it into existence. Where someone might call it speaking in tongues, someone else might say light language. When someone says, I've received the divine word of God, maybe someone else would say that's clairaudience or claircognizance or channeling. We have words for these things, but if they're from God, they're fine. If they're not, they're from the devil. That is what the church brings to it. I don't hold that belief anymore. So anyway, it's a bite model, which is a invention by someone named a thing made by Stephen Hassan. And he brought it up as a method of figuring out if something was a cult and starting to, I guess, peel back the layers of belief, peel back the layers of what it's made up of, if that makes sense. So it is an acronym, BITE. So what that stands for, the B is for behavior, the I is for information, the T is for thought, and the E is for emotion. And these are all four areas that cults and religions and MLMs and all of that will often use to control people. Whether or not, and this is one thing that I get asked a lot, people are like, I don't think, my pastor was actively doing this. No, he probably wasn't actively doing this, wasn't doing this consciously. It's built into the model of the church. It is built into the religion itself. So it's not always like I'm going to control these people and I'm going to make sure that, I control their behavior and the information they get and the way they think, this is going to be so good and they're going to keep coming back. That's not what it is. It's not like that. It's still not good, but it's not always consciously ungood. That is not a word. It's not always consciously bad. Welcome to Hannah's brain.
Double plus on good. You're just speaking in newspeak. We just slipped into 1984 for a second. It's okay.
Okay, wonderful. So with the B, we'll start with the B, behavior. This is anything when we're trying to recognize if what we're in is a cult, and this can be used for witchy spaces, spiritual spaces, a new religion that you're exploring, anything. You want to run it through this bite method and see what sticks. Okay. Are the rules in this organization controlling your behavior? Now, in that, I mean things like, do they dictate who you can hang out with, who you need to exclude, who you need to marry, who you can marry, right? So we think of the traditional gender expectations of the church, right? They're saying you can marry someone of the opposite sex, not anyone else though, right? That's controlling your behavior. There's also even the aspect of, well, you can be gay, you just can't act on it, right? And then it's okay. So those sorts of little leeways, what they're trying to do is control your behavior. You know, oh, we don't associate with those people. Or sometimes these are unspoken as well. Growing up in our church, we didn't associate with people who weren't in the church. This wasn't something our pastor stood up and said, you can't hang out with people who aren't Christians. But it became a social expectation. You just don't hang out with people who aren't Christians unless you're trying to convert them. That's the little difference. So this is all part of this behavior control. Now, this also comes into, if we see someone or if we see the group shunning someone, that is a method of behavior control because, hell no, I'm not doing that thing now. I've seen what happens when you do the undesirable thing. I don't want to get shunned, so I'm going to control my behavior to make sure that does not happen. Right?
Yeah.
This comes down to even little things. I have memories of when we were late to church and you have to walk in when the pastor's already speaking, everyone's sitting down, the collective turning of heads and the facial expressions of, how dare you? How dare you arrive late and interrupt this, right? That is enough to make you never late again. Your behavior is now controlled. You are now there early, right? There's so many little nuances to this, and they often go completely unperceived until somebody points them out, until somebody gives you an example. And I'm sure there are many, many examples. But just look at how your current belief system or anything like that controls your behavior. For example, with witchcraft, there is really my own personal set of ethics, and that's it, right? I can hang out with whoever the hell I want. I can speak with whoever I want. I can not speak with whoever I want. It's really just down to my personal choice, and that is so much more empowering. There's no one around saying, oh, no, you can't talk to that person, right? Oh, no, you can't hang out with them. It's not a thing, right?
Not to say that there aren't witches out there who do that, because there are.
There are. But I guess it's not a big organization, right? And there's no money involved in a lot of that aspect, right? It's not like a church that we're going to.
Right.
There are some covens, but again, they're not like, you don't have to pay to be a member of the coven. I'm sure there might be, actually. There's going to be bad people and bad stuff everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah.
But as an overall religion, far more freeing in your behavior and what you can do. You can marry, all of those things.
And there's a lot of witches who don't even, I don't have a religion. Yeah. I'm a witch, but they're like that because they're...
Or a secular witch.
They're different things, mostly. I mean, they don't have to be. You can have them very tightly integrated, or you can have them completely like stiff-arming one another, and that's your choice.
So then there is the I, which is information control.
This is the big one for me.
Yeah, actually, I have one other thing with the behavior one. Purity culture comes into that as well, which I didn't touch on, but we can get to that in a minute. Information control. Now, the information control is really, really critical because whoever controls the information can control, I guess, the people, right? If you have someone that is telling you, I have all the information, this information is true, and anything else anyone tells you is wrong, because this is the word of God and what they're saying is not, that's of the devil, right? They're they're already starting to control that information. Now, when they say that, they're teaching you things like, oh, the rapture is real, as an example, right? The rapture's in the Bible, rapture's coming any day now, all these things that they'll say, but they're not going to tell you exactly what the rapture is. You find out, sometimes you'll get a little graph, depending on your church and your brand of Christianity, right, about what it is. But no one's sitting there and going, okay, where did this come from? Never once. We were very much a rapture-centric church. Never once did anyone ever tell me that that bloody thing wasn't invented until the 1830s. Had no idea, because the way it was put forward to us, the information we were given was selective. It was just what is in the Bible. It's in the Bible, so it's happening. It's not in the bloody Bible, right? It's not there.
No, it's not there.
They had an answer for everything. If you said, where is it? They'd say, oh, it's here. It's this one. But you have to understand blah, 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 blah. And they'd make it something, in my class, I go into all the things that they say means the rapture and why they say that and why it's misconstrued. But any questions you ask of why is usually met with doubt your doubt, not your faith, or just pray on it, those sorts of things. They're kind of dismissing you. And anytime you find something like, oh, but I found this thing that said maybe this wasn't real, or maybe, maybe the flood didn't happen because they have no record of it, and here, and science tells us this, science is the devil. They had us thinking that scientists had buried pretend fossils of dinosaur bones and things like that because the devil wanted to sway us away from God. Like, what twisted, warped logic is that, right? But when you're being told that by someone who is in power, if you've been born into that and it is all you know and everyone around you knows it, and anyone who doesn't believe it is told to be, demons whispering in their ears, it's the devil, they're wrong, they're evil, or they're an idiot, right?
Now science is making hurricanes, to prove, climate change.
Yeah, right? Like, or that's a sign of the tribulation coming. This is end times, right? That's how they probably word it.
Rumors of wars.
Yeah, which have been going around for time immemorial, but they ignore that part, right? So they rely on the congregation's lack of biblical knowledge, lack of reasoning, logic, and historical knowledge, cultural knowledge. When my mum went through Bible college, she said a lot of people came out not Christian anymore because it relied so much on faith. Because when you find out the context of the times, what the Bible actually says in its original languages, suddenly things start to fall away and you're like, oh. She said a lot of people... I
still love the delicious irony of that one.
Yeah, right? So the information control, it's controlling the information that you're given, but it's also controlling the information you get from external sources. So we were expected not to listen to secular radio. We could listen to Light FM, which is the Christian radio station. We couldn't listen to the other ones, to the point that we were like heavily shamed if anyone caught you listening to one of the standard ones, right? With the NSYNC bops. So they're controlling the external media. We weren't allowed to watch, I wasn't allowed to watch Snow White growing up because it had a witch in it. Look at me now, Mum. Like, there was so many pieces of media that we were prevented from reading, lest it infect our brains and disrupt that information control, right? So if you're not getting that external information and you're only getting your information from one source, of course they are controlling that information. So it's a huge one. Did you want to talk on that? You said you wanted to.
Yeah, we had Harry Potter as the thing that I remember as an adult when all those books are coming out, and it's the small children, and do you let your kids read the Harry Potter? Mm-hmm. And I then, of course, find it, again, the universe is hilarious that, once she comes out as a big turf, now all the Christians love her.
Tell me about it. Oh my God.
It's just like, as long as you hate the right people, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like I remember that, and then I remember the Dan Brown books coming out, the Da Vinci Code and all of that stuff. Yeah, they're really fun, but we weren't supposed to read them. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned that on this podcast or not, but I did in fact hand out gospel tracts outside the Da Vinci Code movie.
Oh,
yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Cringy things we look back and we're like, oh, I used to do that.
I did so much shit that I'm embarrassed of. But anyway, yeah, like, and it's interesting because it worked. It felt a little bit differently in my world, where it wasn't so much that you were shamed for listening to the secular radio, but like anytime somebody had an opportunity to brag about how they were listening to the Christian radios, like it was more this like, look how Christian, because I'm doing the Christian this and the Christian that and the Christian this. And then like, well, I read the Da Vinci Code, but it was so that I could understand it and use it from an apologetics perspective in my evangelism. Like, you really just wanted to read the fucking Da Vinci Code, but and more power to you. But yeah, like there was always like Christian wash everything that we do, and as long as we could do that, and I saw a lot of that, honestly, the interesting hypocrisy, like, because I'm sitting like, no, I actually really believe all this shit, and you people are like being all casual about it. What's that? Like, that was where I was coming from, because I'm sitting there saying, well, logically, if the Bible says this, this, and this, then you have to do this, but y'all are doing this. Oh, no, that's okay. You're no.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that even for me, like, even with the information control, I was starting to reason through the stuff that I did have, and it was falling apart on its own merit. But
which
then
is a lot of the reason why people are discouraged from going to secular schools, higher education, university, because they teach you how to critically examine texts. That's like the worst thing you can do if you want someone to be a good Christian.
Oh, I remember they made us take this 1 hour class in university. I don't remember the name of it, but literally like the whole class was like teaching you about critical thinking and like, you know, the Socratic method and how the university is supposed to, like, it was all this stuff that we thought was ridiculous because we were 18 years old. But in hindsight, they're laying the foundation for like how you acquire knowledge. And if you're not taught that, I mean, most people are not going to come up with that on their own, except over a very long period of time.
And you look at the high rates of homeschooling within the Christian faith. That's information control. That's like, you know what? We're not going to let any outside sources in here. We're giving you a purely creationist, God-centered education. And that also means we're never going to teach you how to critically examine stuff. We're never going to give you that information that could pull the rug out from under your feet, basically.
And honestly, most of the basic skills that you want to get out of that education, you also don't get. So you end up with a bunch of people who are now adults who can't actually function in the world.
And rely on the church.
Even when they escape the cult, it's like, I don't have any actual skills to function in the world because we weren't allowed to have those skills. It's what mom taught me to do. That was all I could do.
Yep, absolutely. And there's also, with the information control, there's deception, like distorting the information that you get to make it more acceptable. So we see passages in the Bible that are twisted, cherry-picked, and altered when you look at the different versions of the Bible as well. So things like the word homosexual, which wasn't in the Bible until the 40s. The 1940s didn't exist in there before that. Like, it's wild. And that was just a random version of a German Bible that added it in. And then it was basically the American Christian associations were like, I love that. Let's put it in all of them.
Love what you did there.
Oh, yeah. It makes me so mad to see when this is, heralded as this. But it's in the Bible. It's like, is it though? Is it really? And they don't question it because it's in the Bible. This is the Bible my pastor uses. Of course it's real. Of course this is the one.
Okay, we've gotten through B and I.
Yeah. So the next one is thought control. So this is stuff like instilling black and white thinking, right? Which is really harmful because if we're always deciding between good versus evil, us versus them, insiders versus outsiders, sinners versus saved, demons versus angels, heaven versus hell, this black and white thinking leaves no wiggle room for anything grey, right? How tricky is that to navigate life if it's either every single action I have is either good or evil? And I don't want to be the evil side. I don't want to go to hell, so I have to be on the good side. It gives you this very, very high expectations. We all know how anxious you get if you're trying to be a perfectionist all the time. We all know the damages of perfectionism. And that's what it breeds. It breeds this perfectionist thing where we had people in the church who was like, God tells me what to wear every day. No, he fucking doesn't, Deborah. He's not telling you what to wear. Like, that is your own internal thought, but everything is perceived as God. And then everyone else who heard her saying that is like, oh, God doesn't tell me what to wear. Am I doing something wrong? Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I need to wear clothes that are more pleasing to God. It infects everything. Everything. It also, this thought control then, if you think that it's either demons whispering in your ear or God whispering in your ear, because God's always talking to me, but sometimes those thoughts aren't good because that's the human brain, right? That must be the demons talking to me. Now, having that as well in your brain, that means, you're never going to trust yourself. You're never going to trust your intuition, makes you indecisive. It's really tricky, this aspect. Now, there's also the next part is thought control, right? You're controlling your thoughts because God can see your thoughts. Jesus can see your thoughts. Don't sin in your mind. Don't even sin in your thoughts. You look at that woman, you gouge your eyes out, right? Those sorts of concepts. We know even in the spiritual community, this is another big thing. I can't think bad thoughts because I'll manifest them. No, you won't. I saw a thing on Threads the other day. This girl was really worried. She wanted to vent all the shitty stuff and she wanted to write it in a journal, but she was terrified that would manifest it. And I was like, babe, if writing things down was enough to manifest things, then I would feel very sorry for horror writers. Right?
That's true. That's very true.
You
like
know,
the people who wrote True Blood, it's not good for them.
Yeah, right. Like Charlotte Harris would be having a really bad time. Like there's
Yeah.
It's not that simple. Manifesting is not that much. And if we're trying to control, if you can't even vent to your journal, what hope do you have? If you're trying to control every thought and make it positive all the time, you're not giving yourself grace and allowance for the full spectrum of normal human emotions. It demonizes the normal human emotions, which is so bad for our mental health, which in the church doesn't exist because it's all demons. So you can't even get psychological help when this all starts to overwhelm you. So you start to just shut it down. Now, they also teach thought-stopping techniques, which do shut down like things like reality testing. So it stops negative thoughts, only allows positive thoughts. So this is things like praying, right? If you're noticing all these negative thoughts, what's your pastor going to say? Pray about it. All right, so I'm just praying nonstop. Great. Speaking in tongues, singing the songs over and over and over. All of these things stop your normal rational mode of thought as well. In the thought control, they teach a rejection of rational analysis, as we were talking about, a rejection of critical thinking, and a rejection of constructive criticism. And they label all alternative belief systems as illegitimate or evil, including other denominations under the same faith. So all of this is how they're starting to control your mind, essentially, right? Very insidious. And if you're not told this, like how are you going to notice this when you're in it, when you're born into it? How the hell are you ever going to figure that out?
I thought is what I was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I years of self-flagellation with like having thoughts, and
how dare you have thoughts?
I have to take that thought captive to the obedience of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
The number of times that I said those words in my mind during the course of a normal Tuesday,
mm-hmm.
because and guess what? The more you beat those thoughts out of your head, the more you have them, and it's a big, just self-reinforcing loop that it traumatizes you.
Yeah. And you know what we see as well, and this happened with me, when we think about that thought control aspect, this perfectionism aspect, this comparison of, well, God's speaking to them more than me. What am I doing wrong? I must need to try harder. I must need to dress better. I must need to look better. Something about me is not wrong. It's not right. It's wrong. Something about me is wrong. There's also this, everything I do that's good is of God. That's a blessing from God. I got a new job. Thank you, God. That's a blessing from God. I lost my job. God must be angry with me.
Mm-hmm.
I've done something wrong. So all of your bad actions are heaped on your own shoulders. But anything good, you're not given the praise. God is.
Right.
So this breeds really bad self-esteem. This breeds those perfectionist traits, that black and white thinking. This is a recipe, that anxiety aspect, the social pressure. This breeds eating disorders. This breeds self-harm. There's so many flow-on effects from this. I'm not kidding. In our youth group, out of all the girls that I was friends with, maybe 2 of them didn't have an eating disorder. And that is wild, right?
Wow.
because that's just the environment that it instigates.
Yeah.
It's very, and that's my church, right? Other churches might be different. I can only speak from my own experience. But it's really, really sad. It is really heartbreaking. And it's so obvious when you're out of it. And maybe it's not as well.
Yeah.
It's obvious when you look into it and you dive into it and you realize these things, you go, whoa, they all link up together.
Yeah. I think you have to get out of it and get space enough to be able to actually observe it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it took me a couple of years. Like I kind of just went dark spiritually for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, okay, I think my body's like, okay, we're going to heal now.
Yeah.
And then it's like you start, waking that stuff up inside you again. And you're like, I now need spirit again.
Mm-hmm.
Can't go back to church. That's not it. Why? And it's like, you start, and then you start doing all that investigation. You start looking back, and it all starts to become a little bit more clear. And then I hit this point again where it's like, I can't think those thoughts.
That space.
My brain doesn't admit them.
Yeah, that space is really needed because you have a little bit of space, you go back to it and you see it fresh and you're like, oh, this feels weird. That's weird. Why did we do that? Oh my God. And you understand it because you're like, I did this for so long, but then you're like, oh, is it weird?
Like, what's back to your point about like, it's not always conscious that it's being done. Like I would say your average pastor is just as much a part of the system as we were.
Yes.
And while, the system is built to perpetuate propping them up.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just work within the system, you're going to get rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you question that either? Like I say this all the time. Like if this is all you know and you're rewarded for it, why would you stop?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
Like you wouldn't.
And when we then dip into the emotional control aspect, which just adds an even deeper layer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, how we're sort of saying, making the person feel that the problems are always their own fault, right? But it's also never the leaders and it's never the groups. It's never Christianity. It's never the pastor, right?
Right.
We see this with when people leave. And the very first thing a lot of Christians will say is, well, you were never Christian in the first place.
Right. Yep.
Now, what that does, unfortunately, is it completely invalidates and dismisses the person who left's experience, right? Of course I was. I believed it with my entire being. It's all I knew. How else is there to be? No, you mustn't have had a proper relationship with Jesus. Otherwise you never would have left, right? But
you just wanted to go have a bunch of sex is what it was.
Yeah, you just wanted to go and sin. Now,
right.
Unfortunately, what this also does is it's actually holding up a mirror to the person's own fears, right? It's showing you what they believe. And I feel so sorry for the people that say that because they're trapping themselves. Because if they believe that, they will never leave. Because what does that mean for them and their experiences?
Yeah.
So it's really, really hard.
And so you just push all that deeper into your shadow.
Yeah. And this is also this emotional control, right? This is placing it back on those people. But this is where we start to see things getting swept under the rug, right? It's never a problem with Christianity. That was just a bad church. It's not Christianity or God. That's just a bad pastor. But then why do we see, such high rates of sexual abuse in the church environment? Surely there's something to do with with the religion, right? There's an overlap here. Why do we see such abuse of power in these positions from these pastors? Why is there such a high rate of infidelity?
It's a really safe place to do it.
Yeah.
It's a really safe place to do it. I mean, if that's your thing, you're protected. We protect the abusers in the one place that we should be the most fervently about ferreting them out because that's where people are making themselves vulnerable and trusting you with their very spiritual lives. And yet, this is where we, if you want to be a child predator, this is probably the safest place for you to hang out.
And we saw this with things like the Houstons, right? Frank Houston, who was a child abuser, and just how the pastor of my church signed off on the document with Brian Houston around keeping everything quiet, right? Like it was all the churches in Australia basically that were a part of the ACC, the Australian Christian Churches community, which Hillsong created and then stepped out of when they didn't like the legislation. Then we saw when Brian Houston went back to court again for covering up the abuse allegations and all of that, even though he knew about it and not telling anyone. When that happened, we saw the church and we saw the damage control that Hillsong did with Bobby and Brian and the letters they were putting out. You know, the world is against us. The devil is against us. They're trying to bring us down. You know, we would never wish to harm anybody. We thought we were doing the right thing. It's like PR control of a celebrity scale with pastors, right? Because they become celebrity pastors. And there's so many scandals with Hillsong, yet it's one of the fastest growing popular churches in Australia. I don't understand it. How are the people of the congregation just ignoring it? There was the whole scandal with traveling pastors, right? They'd get a celebrity pastor in from the States. They'd come and speak. They would pay them for that, but then they'd also take up a love donation, right? So they'd
love offerings.
A love offering. Yeah, that's like what 30. What did they say? When I asked my mum about this, when we went to the colour conferences at Hillsong, it was expected that you would give to the love offering like $30 to $50, sometimes more, per person. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people at these conferences, right?
Wow.
They're taking home a big tax-free donation, and then they would have out, the Hillsong pastors back over there to their church, and it was just this. It was a big rort. It was a big scam, and it got leaked out in the media, and there's articles, you can go and read them, right? It is very public knowledge about this love offering scam, and no one cares. It's like it didn't happen. The church just makes it go away and controls the narrative in such a way that the congregation is like, oh, they just don't understand Christianity. They just don't understand what we're doing here. They don't understand what the pastors are doing. The government's out against us, right? It's very insidious the way it does. Again, with emotional control, we have promoting feelings of guilt and unworthiness. You are born a sinner. Jesus died for your sins. You're hurting Jesus, right? Identity guilt around, what if you have an identity outside of the expectation? What if you are trans, non-binary, gay, bi, anything, right? You suddenly have guilt just for being who you are. Your past becomes suspect, right? Your affiliations are unwise. All of these things are promoting that guilt and unworthiness. But then there's also instilling fear. This is when we're getting into that phobia indoctrination, right? Thinking independently, you have to be fearful of that, right? Because any independent thought, that's the devil. That's not what the Bible, that must be the devil. The outside world becomes something to be afraid of. There's always enemies lurking. You could lose your salvation at any moment with any wrong decision. If you leave, you will be shunned, right? These are the fear tactics. The phobia indoctrination itself is inculcating irrational fears about leaving the group or questioning authority or questioning the leaders. Because, there's what they tell you is there's no chance of happiness or fulfillment outside of the group. You'll be throwing your life away if you leave the church, right? And we look at people who have, they'll say that person who is, I don't know, doing whatever, right? That person is marrying someone of the same sex. They have a queer relationship. They're throwing their life away, right? They'll point at people and say they're throwing their life away. And so you go, oh, okay, that's not what we can do. We can't do that. Because then people will say I'm throwing my life away, or then I might be throwing my life away, throwing my salvation away, etc. There's terrible consequences if you leave. There's hell, which, the whole doctrine of hell is its own thing, but demon possession, the tribulation, not being raptured, right? There's all these terrible consequences for making the wrong choice or for leaving. Again, that shunning, that rejection of friends and family, that loss of community, that loss of support, that loss of social interaction is really, really, really difficult. And there's, as we said before, never a legitimate reason to leave. Those who leave are weak, undisciplined, unspiritual, worldly, brainwashed by a family or a counselor, or seduced by money or sex or sin. Like there's always something as to why they've left, right? It's never their choice, and it's never the right choice. So these are all ways that they start to pull on those emotional strings. And, you've got one from the behavior, one from information, one from thought, and one from emotion. You're hook, line, and sinker, you're in. It's all it takes. Right? And if you're in a situation where you're like, am I in a cult? There's only like one out of a couple of those. Probably not, right? There are cults that are benign, that are good, that are fine, as long as you know everything going in. And that's the other thing with Christianity. You don't know everything going in. When they're like, do you want to give your heart to Jesus? Half the time you don't know any of the doctrines. You've not read the Bible yet, You don't know what you're signing up for, really. You're just signing up for a chance at redemption. They prey on people's past or guilt or feelings of unworthiness or shame. They prey on that, PREY, and capitalize on it.
Speaking of fear-based tactics, the main reason that I wanted to have you come talk about these topics were because the bite model and phobia indoctrination are they in the last episode, the last class of your so Hannah has this course that we mentioned, Ridiculous Rapture Rhetoric. And I know that from the audience that I attract, that again, a lot of people have dealt specifically with the Christian rapture doctrine. And I was in one of those churches that I was shortly after 9/11 happened. And, at least in our part of the evangelical church, the end of the world vibe was very hot. Because we had just come through the year 2000, and we thought Jesus was going to come back then. And now we've got 9/11 and all this stuff. Everybody was at church. And a couple months into that, they announced, we're going to go through the whole book of Revelation for 6 months. And it was a huge production. And of course, that was the last few books of the Left Behind series are coming out during that time. So I remember just being drowned in rapture and the tribulation and all of that stuff. And all of that within the same constructs that we've been talking about. All that rapture stuff was filtered through the bite model, filtered through the phobia indoctrination tactics. So anyway, that's my into your class. Tell us about it. What made you create it? Why did you do it the way you did it?
Yeah.
Anything.
So when I got this idea, I actually randomly, I had a migraine. I have chronic migraine disease. I had a migraine. I was lying in my bed, and often this is kind of the only time that I guess I am forced to rest because I'm in so much pain. And Ben came in, my husband, and he said, can I get you anything? Do you need anything? And it was very bizarre because I'd sort of been drifting in and out of sleep because it can be very tricky to sleep, drifting in and out. And it was like I just got this light bulb moment. And I said, bring me a pen and paper. And he was like, okay. It's a very unusual request when I have a migraine. It's usually bring me a very strong coffee, bring me the heat pack or the ice pack, something like that, right? And so he brings me this piece of paper, and I still have that piece of paper. I still use that. And it was just like and I'm getting shivers now as I'm talking about it. This feels like spiritual stuff, right? I just got this influx of an idea, and I started writing down all of the things that I wanted to teach on in terms of helping people deconstruct. I believe that is something so necessary for the world, to help people to deconstruct. And it was things like cult tactics, right? Phobia indoctrination, the rapture doctrine, the doctrine of hell, what does the Bible actually say about God? Did God have a wife? Is God from the Canaan religion? All of those questions that I was I want to answer all of these for people. What myths could this have been based on? Myth comparisons. What about at the church? I've got it all in a huge Notion document now. And I basically did that. It all came out of me, and then I just fell back to sleep. And Ben was like, okay, that was weird, but all right. But it was a full page of just
it's another one of those things you can't explain.
Yeah, exactly. So then I sort of let it sit there for a little bit. I mulled over it, and I was like, I don't know where to start with this. This feels overwhelming. There's so much here. So I went on to Instagram, and I just basically put up a little poll. I was like, hey guys, if I made a class about, and I just picked 5 things. I was like, about these 5 things, which one do you want the most? And the 2 top ones were the doctrine of hell and the rapture doctrine. And the rapture doctrine won out. And I was like, yes, I can absolutely help with this, because I no longer believe that's going to happen. And I used to absolutely believe that it was going to happen. I used to be the kid that walked out when my parents, I'd wake up late. My parents are outside gardening, but I couldn't see them. And I'd walk out and be like, Mom, Dad?
Oh my.
And
Oh my.
the fear of like they've been raptured without me.
Oh my goodness.
And that's traumatic, right? And I don't have that reaction anymore when I wake up in a house by myself. It's gone. And I was like, okay, what helped me get rid of it? And a few things were understanding that it was very new to the Christian way of thinking. As I said earlier, 1830s, right? It was created by a man, John Nelson Darby. And then I tried to think of, okay, well, do I still think the end of the world's going to happen? What about this? And I tried to ask myself all of the questions that I could imagine a Christian friend asking me, right? If I was talking about it. And so I started putting together this class. And originally it was supposed to be a 1 hour class. I was like, great, I'll get up. I'll be like, okay, rapture started here. This is where it comes from. This is why you don't need to believe it. This is why it's wrong. Blah, 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 blah. But as it often goes with these things, when I'm, compiling my resources, there was suddenly a rabbit hole here. And I was like, oh, let me just look into that quickly. And then suddenly I was down so many rabbit holes. It ended up taking me a good 2 or 3 months to actually create this class. It turned into a mini course. So I call it a class, Ridiculous Rapture Rhetoric, but it is actually more like a mini course. There are 5 lessons, 6 videos in total. There's like a welcome video, which goes for like 15 minutes. Then I think 3 of them are around about the 20-minute mark, and 2 of the videos are 45 to 50 minutes, right? So there's quite a lot there. Along with the videos, there is further resources, further reading. There is links to all of the source material that I was looking at, the studies that I was reading, all of that sort of a thing. Podcasts you can listen to for further information. Like, it's very extensive. Further stuff you can go on with. There are a lot of memes thrown in there and funnies and clips and things just to lighten it a little bit, because it's a very heavy topic, right? We're talking about death. We're talking about the waters will turn to blood, and those who seek death will not have it, right? There's heavy topics in here, and if you've got that religious trauma, it can be triggering, and I didn't want that for people. So we start off talking about religious trauma and what that means, religious trauma syndrome, how to recognize it, what to do if you're feeling that coming up for yourself, right? Then we talked about what I wanted to start with was, well, what is the rapture in the Bible? No, it's not, and why it's not, and how it's not. But then we go into Revelation, because a lot of people, say, well, there's a whole book called the Book of Revelation, which obviously details exactly what's going to happen. So what I wanted to do is my very Virgo-esque thing, which is, let's go through the who, what, why, when, and how.
Hey, I love it.
And I answered those questions. Who wrote this? Why did they write this? When did they write this? What did they write? How did they think this was going to be perceived, right? How did this book end up in the Bible? Why is it in the Bible? Because that was a point of contention when it was coming down to it, right?
And remind me, I want to say that you were the one who explained to me that John of Patmos was not actually the Apostle John.
Correct. Different Johns.
And I actually believe that was the very first time I had ever heard that particular piece of information is in your class. And I've been away from this for a long time.
So the Book of Revelation was written by John of Patmos, who is not John the Apostle. Different people. And we know this because their writing styles are very different. John of Patmos, his Greek was not that great. There are many errors. The entire vibe is off. Like, many scholars have agreed. Definitely different people. Okay.
Yeah, they kept that well hidden from me.
This is another part of information control, right? They're not going to tell you that because they want you to presume that John is that John, because that would kind of give it a bit more weight. But even if you don't, even if you're like, no, we were taught that. We were taught that John of Patmos was different. Great, sweet. Well, did they tell you that on the island of Patmos, there's the plant wormwood, which is mentioned specifically in the Book of Revelation, right? They say the star of wormwood would fall into the water and the waters become bitter. Well, wormwood is a herb that does make water bitter. If you had a tea, it's a bitter herb. It's also hallucinogenic, right? And a lot of religious folk back in that time period would take this to induce visions, spiritual visions. Like, this was a common thing that would happen. So, I mean, that's a weird That's a weird thing, right? A hallucinogen that's mentioned in there, a very weird book about all the things he's seeing. Maybe he's just having a bad trip, guys. And you know what? This isn't just a theory. There are many studies, multiple, and I reference them all. And we go into depth on some of the other ones around, the mushrooms in the area and that sort of a thing, and commonalities with like an ayahuasca trip, right? So this was one of those rabbit holes that I was like, hell yeah, this is so fascinating. I have to talk about this. And that's in there because I do believe it's relevant to understanding what was happening at the time. Who was he writing this for? People 1,000 years in the future? No, he was not. So we go through that. We go through when pastors often talk about, there's areas of the Bible that, like Thessalonians and Matthew, that refer to the rapture, why they think that, what it actually says, and what it actually means in the context of the history of the time. So we sort of cover all of those, and the very last one is about phobia, indoctrination, and why they, utilizing your fear in this regard. Because a lot of times I hear people say, you don't believe in God, but what if you're wrong? And they're speaking from a place of fear. They're like, you know what? I'd rather be safe than sorry. That's what they're living their entire life around. So we go through all of that. At no point am I trying to disprove Christianity, but what I am trying to show is that the way we've been taught the rapture doctrine is fallible. The way we've been taught the Bible is fallible, and we don't always have all the information. So I'm trying to give you all of the information in a way that is easy to understand and gives you the sources as well to back it up when, your uncle at the table's going off about it. So that's what I've tried to round it all out to. I'm very, very, very proud of this class. I do think it's going to help a lot of people. So that's why I did it. It's out there in the universe. It will eventually become its own module in my evangelical course, but I'm just going to be creating class at a time. Otherwise I'll get too overwhelmed. So one at a time, because as you saw, it took me 3 months to make just one of them.
I remember when you started talking about it. Mm-hmm. And then I remember when it finally came out. And and I remember you talking about making it. Like, this was like
a long time in the making.
Not completely all consuming, but it was consuming a lot of you there for a while. And, again, like, as a student, like, I am a satisfied customer of the class.
Yeah.
Like, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this episode was because I wanted more people to know about this resource.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's good.
Like, I go through the book of Revelation. My church wasn't so funky about the fact that there's an S on the end and there's not supposed to be an S, and I've had so many...
She's leaving off the fact where I called her out for saying Revelations. Not that I actually care, but I just thought...
You are not the only
honestly, one. But there were people who... I had a pastor specifically who went on like a 20-minute rant about the name of the book one morning, and that's the thing that lodged in my brain.
Yeah.
And so when you started saying Revelations, I was twitching. That's how insidious this shit is.
I put a little clip up talking about it, and this Christian guy was like, how could I ever learn about this from someone who doesn't even know it's called the Book of Revelation? And I was like, some churches cared about that, some did not, right? Like, my church did not care. That was never a part of the teaching that it mattered, right? It was just colloquially what we called it. We're also Aussie, so things get a little bit if people don't care that much around those sorts of things. I'm sure some churches do. Ours didn't. And if you can't see
guess what? It didn't have a title on it when he wrote it anyway.
There's more than one revelation in there.
The Book of Revelation.
Yeah. So
he didn't put that at the top in an H1. It's just not there.
But in the class, in the lesson on the Book of Revelation, I go through it step by step. This is what they say will happen. Then they say this will happen, and then this, and then this, and then this. And sometimes seeing it all laid out clearly like that, you go, this is absolutely bonkers. This is the most bonkers thing I've ever read. And it kind of just hones down on the fact that, is this actually what people believe? Or is this what I believe? Is this really it? Because they never stand up there and really, at least my church never did, give you the full play-by-play of everything that's going to happen. Because I think if they did, people would be like, what? I'm out. It's so batshit crazy.
I'll be honest with you, though. They did lay it out pretty darn well. and people ate it up because it's going to happen to all the other people.
Yeah, true.
It's going to happen to all the other people. It's not going to happen to us. We're going to get right. So like, yeah, but if you were like, an action and, dystopian fantasy, junkie, like the Revelation's a good story if that's your thing.
Well, I think as well.
And so they hyped it up.
Our church was, the biggest thing in our church was about bringing new people to God. So every week there was competitions about who could bring the most new people to the church. So I think that's probably why that sort of a sermon was not preached on a Sunday, because it would scare off those people. Bible study, maybe, well, not even. Bible study was really just pick one verse and stick with it, right? Like very selective. So I think a lot of that was orchestrated around making new people comfortable in the church. And then, because if you go there for the first time and hear that, there's no way you're staying.
Yeah, we had I think we had much more of a, church was for the Christians, like the Sunday service was. Like, we had all these outreach arms where you were going, like there was this big emphasis on go and, people, and then and bring them back into the church. Like they would actually say, you're not supposed to just invite people to church. You have to invite people to Jesus, then you bring them to church.
Oh no, we had
like, it was a weird thing that, and this is why I think it's interesting when we get to talk about like the differences between, like, we both very much were in evangelicalism, but we have a lot of similar experiences and a lot of completely different experiences.
I think culturally
and it's a big thing.
Yeah, culturally as well. I mean, there's a difference definitely in the States versus Australia, and how these sorts of things are taken and viewed as well. So that definitely plays a part.
But like, we looked at Pentecostals a little bit weird in the Baptist church.
We were a little bit weird.
Yeah, we thought that y'all's stuff was a little bit
wacko.
Y'all were a little bit wacko crazy.
Yeah. Like, the nighttime service was usually not the one that people bring people to, like new people, because that's just a bit odd. We would usually do the Sunday morning and the Sunday night service. It was the same sermon.
Oh yeah, Sunday night was definitely a different crowd.
Same sermon, but the Sunday night was where you had everyone falling over on the floor, slain in the spirit, shaking.
We didn't get to do all that fun
shaking
shit.
And like all sorts of things. We had a weird guy with a flag. The flag waver.
Like, if we did that, they'd get carried out. It was, you didn't get to make, like, it was.
No, we had that. We had the crying, singing, wailing, speaking in tongues, shouting, jumping. It was very, very intense.
I mean, I would have probably stayed awake more.
Maybe. I don't know. You just get the pressure, like, is he going to call me up there? Am I going to have to fall over like that?
Okay, if it was a calling up there thing, I would have been terrified.
A lot of the time it was,
because I was terrified. It's funny, I became a public speaker, but I was terrified of going in front of the church.
Yeah.
I was terrified of all those eyes looking at me.
It's also, you had to act. What do I do when I get up there?
Yeah. What am I going to say? What if I say the wrong thing?
Well, it was more just like lots of people.
What if you ask me a question, I'll give the right answer?
Lots of people sort of at the front. You're not on the stage. You're down.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about different things. So I'm thinking about the altar call.
Yeah, altar call.
Yeah, well, altar call for us was what? Well, so we did, depending on the church. So we had the things where people would go. There would be some of that, but it was our much muted version of it. But then there was the people who are going down to say, "Oh, I want to join the church. I want to get saved," or whatever. And in the smaller church, when all that was done, you had to stand up there and the pastor talked about you to the whole congregation.
We didn't have that, but we had like hundreds of people.
Everybody would come by. The whole thing.
It
was like you had your own receiving line. I was terrified. Like, it was because when my parents joined the church, when we moved to wherever the city was, I was up, you have to come stand up there with us. I'm like, what the fuck do you mean I need to go? I'm 5 years old saying, no, I'm not really. But what the fuck do you mean I got to go stand in front of the church? And then all these people are coming by. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I remember the first time the pastor came to our house. And I was like, oh my God, is he going to see me sin? Like it was, I mean, just thinking of it, like,
we were in a mega church.
Me out.
So there was often, 50 people, maybe 100 people at the altar call.
Yeah, I did that. That was my adult experience. My childhood experience, like we were proud when we got 350 people in the building.
Yeah, no, we had
like, that was a big day.
Thousands, and even now they've got multiple services every week across the whole state because it's just grown so much.
Yeah, we have a church here locally that now has 4 locations. They started out with 1.
We even got location.
And-
Not we. The church of my childhood now even has locations in Thailand.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, my stepbrother has done a lot of work with that one, with that church. Went over there to preach at the Ladyboys about how wrong they are. Makes my blood.
Well, the class is great.
Yes,
Y'all need
I highly
to get
recommend
your
it, everyone.
hands on it.
If I don't say so myself. It's fun and informative. And what more could you want?
And so when this comes out, around that time, the class is going to be available.
Mm-hmm.
I will have whatever link is appropriate in the show notes so that if you want to immediately run and buy the class after you listen to us talk about it, we will facilitate that for you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
Well, this has been awesome, as always.
Thank you for having me again. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you so much for breaking down all this information, because this is yet another way that we're going to get it into people's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
I believe it's necessary to literally help the future.
It is. We need to know how this stuff works so that we can protect ourselves from it. Information isn't all you need, but you definitely need it. So, also, if that's not your thing, Hannah's got a library you wouldn't believe out there on YouTube, and her podcast, which is also, you can get through YouTube, all free stuff.
Yeah.
And then, she's got all kinds of other things she does if you're into witchy stuff. And we've got this whole society where we talk to each other all the time. So there's so many different things in Hannah's space that I encourage you, whether you're into deconstruction or not. But, yeah. So that is a cap on this episode of Contemplating Resonance. So if you enjoyed this one, the best way to stay connected is to subscribe on Substack. I've made it easier now. It's contemplatingresonance.com. You don't even have to remember that it's Substack. But that's where you want to subscribe, because if you subscribe there, you get all of this. You get the videos. My videos don't go anywhere else, even YouTube's audio only, because I haven't figured that out. You will also get my email newsletter that has got a lot of other content that we don't talk about on the podcast, but people also seem to enjoy. My open rate on my emails on Contemplating Resonance is ridiculous. I don't know how it happens, but people read my emails. And while you're there, you also can do your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, Google. There's like a billion others that I don't know. But when you go into your podcast thing and do ratings and reviews and all that stuff, that makes other people find the podcast. So that actually helps a lot. So if you're inclined, I would love for those things to keep showing up. And on social media, we're on Instagram and Facebook, Contemplating Resonance. I've tried to make it easy, folks. So anyway, feel free, send me a message, comment on the episode, do the likes, all the fun things, and we will see you. So until then, stay resonant, folks.